So for the first half of my project, I made some procedural generation tiles where if we hit play here, we can actually see them. Just now being created. There we go. So you can see them all being created here. And here you can actually see the steps that the code's going through. So it's placing down water and it's laying down the grass. And then when it gets to the end of the generation, of which we set, it then closes up all of the water so that one single tile of water exists, which is why we have some awkward 2 bits here, but nothing looks really out of place. It places trees, grass, and there's even rocks, if we look on here. Obviously not on the water because they couldn't exist there. And it also places a house somewhere here. While the art is really crude, it was there more just to prove a point than anything. Now if we actually look at the code, which is just here, we can see exactly what's going on. So each of the tiles that we just saw, the little squares, they're what I called a tile. And I had to make a new class for this called tile, simply just to store some information about them. So for starters, they needed a float, which was the Y position and the X position. This is where they existed on the map. This was to allow me to basically be able to see exactly where they were placed, so I can work out what to call them, which later on I needed to do so I could check to see what they were. They obviously also needed a game object, which the tile was made up of. Then inside this is the actual bit where the tile is created. So this is just simply setting the variables from here to here and setting the tile object. As we go down, this is where the actual real script starts to happen. So I needed all of these. These are all my variables that I used. Most of these weren't actually used in the inspector. In fact, most of them are set to null, just purely because I didn't need to set them. They were so I could observe what the code was doing, so I could make sure it was working properly and fix any bugs. It's all very simple stuff. So the max x and max y. So it starts at 0, 0, and then for each thing we go up. So for example, if I set max x to 5 and max y to 5, it would create a 5 by 5 tile because that is as much as they could create. These are just integers that I needed to hold a number. This is what we were talking about up here. So this creates a list of tiles that I needed to use to see all the tiles in one place. So for here, this was something that I never actually got finished. I never got finished, unfortunately. I was trying to create a black border around it to allow the player to feel like they were truly just confined to this area. But after I switched projects, I never really got the chance to go back to it and fix it all. So this was unfortunately quite useless to make, but still, it almost worked, and I wish I did go back to it and fix it. But if we look into the Unity project, you'll kind of see what I mean. So here it just didn't quite work properly, and I could never get it lined up perfectly. Pardon me. It left really, for some reason, it just never went all the way around here, and it went in there instead, giving me this really horrible thing here, which doesn't look all that great, and I kind of regret adding it in because it just makes my work look a little bit less complete. So the first thing, obviously, I needed to do as soon as the thing starts was to actually create the tiles. This is all of the green and blue you saw on there. Originally, they are all green, which is all done here. Yeah, so this adds in a new tile. Sorry, they're all blank to begin with. Yeah, it adds in a new tile, which just does this. The placeholder is simply because I needed to send it to up here. If we look here, the game object, tile object, that needs to be something. So at the time, it was simply just called placeholder. So I could send it to it so I didn't get an error saying, oh no, you can't run this. And here we then start a new coroutine, which if the y does not equal the max y, then we start a new coroutine. I couldn't use x because if you look at how it's created, y, yeah, sorry, I'm just slowly thinking to myself, it doesn't go up to the y, it goes across to the x. So here's when the actual interesting stuff starts happening. So it's called print me for each tile in tiles, which is quite a mouthful. It does this. So what this is saying for each tile, God, this is gonna be a difficult one to explain. So for each tile, which is what this is called, in tile, which is what I called this. So for each thing in tile, which is the list, tile in tiles, which is the class, in tiles, which is the name of the list. Hopefully that makes sense. We need to do all of these things. So here we have very simply tiles I, y pos. The I is done down here. This means each time the for each loop is run, it will add an I, so each tile obviously has one of those things set to it. This allows us to continuously create and do all of that. So if the dice roll is 47, like this decides if there's water on or not. The water I made quite weirdly, I'd say. I got the idea from an old project I made where I used a gravity bomb, basically, and it sucked everything in. I used the idea of that, but in a 2D setting. So it draws a circle out, and then some of the tiles that it selects then get turned into water, and this is all done with this bit. So all it is it's simply a physics 2D command called overlap circle all. So if we, for example, had just a circle here, it would get everything in that circle. And then for each thing, it will then change this. And then I ran another random range here, which allows it to be a little bit more sporadic and allows it to, so not every tile can be, because it was quite a large radius, it was 7, so that means 7 tiles across, 7 tiles up, 7 tiles, like basically in all direction, would be hit by this. So if I set it to all of that to be turned to water, it would be insane. It would really be like, it would just be pure water everywhere. So if this is greater than 70 and it also hasn't been worked before, it will then be changed to water. Now the water can't create more water because obviously again that would just create this huge build-up of everything and it would just go horribly. Yeah. So here, this is where I clean my water, because as I said before, if we go back onto the Unity project, we can see that as the water is created, there's these horrible single blocks of water, and I really hated looking at this because I thought it looked really just not clean. And I wanted it to be, you go up to a bit of water and you wouldn't expect there just to be one block, you'd expect it to be 2 or more. And as we just saw there, it completely cleans it all up, so there's only 2 blocks or more of water. That is all done in here. So it gets game object to left, to right, to up, to down. Sorry, no, that's wrong. It's this bit that we want. That's me being an idiot. So here, this is where it actually happens. So for each tile in tiles again, we need to get everything here. This grabs this grabs a tile to the top, to the bottom, to the left and to the right by simply adding these. This is now what the tiles are actually called, sorry. This is naming the tiles. And then all of this is where we find them. This is where we find every single one, which allows us to then do this. So if it does not equal null, then it sets all of this. This was because I was getting errors saying, oh, because obviously as we're running this, some of them won't be created. And I don't know why, but as soon as I did this, it just started to work perfectly. It was really nice. It just worked, and I wasn't entirely sure why I got the error before. And if I had more time to go back to it, obviously I'd like to explore this a little bit more, because it almost felt like it was making it lag because it wasn't doing the check, but as the check was then being done, it slowed down this process enough to where the next tile would then be created in all directions. It was a bit of a weird one, but it worked, and that was all I really cared about when I was making this, was just getting it working so I can see sort of what I needed to add to it. And then it sends to this. This is on the tile. So we go to on tile quickly. This is when we actually get rid of the single tile waters. So what it's doing here is it's checking for each of the sprites on the tiles. So the tiles to the left, right, up and down. If they equal grass, then left equals false, because left is not water. If right is false, then right does not equal water. Yeah. So if all of them are false, it's grass. However, though, if all of them are true, then it creates water, and it will keep the water or it will turn itself into water. And this is more or less the same. It needs to check, obviously, to make sure. So this is placing the rocks and the trees and the grass all on here. And it's much the same. It's just if the things are in between 0 and 20 for this, it will place a tree. In between 20 and 40, it will place a rock. In between 60 and 70, it will create grass. We can see that in here because you'll notice that the trees and the rocks appear a lot more than the grass does, and that there's even more empty green tiles than there is of any of the three. Hopefully, obviously it is all random, so there could be more or less. But generally speaking, we can see this effect in here quite nicely. And it means that we have lots of trees and lots of rocks. Because at this point, I still wanted to do a whole bunch of survival bits. And so you could go up to the trees, you cut them down, get wood, go up to a rock, you could mine it. And I slowly started to realize that I was way in over my head. I was overscoping like crazy, and it just wouldn't have worked. So let me go back to this bit. The last bit I needed to do was the building place. And this was simply just to place the building at the end. So I'll just show you one more time just so you know what I'm on about. So you don't think I'm going crazy or anything. So yeah, we can see it all being created here very slowly. And poof, all there. So this building here, I had a lot of problems with this, and as you can tell, I'm not the greatest artist. I never said I was. But basically what was happening was the pivot point was set far too low. It was set down here. And I kept on trying to change it so it would be in the center. But once it was in the center, this was very awkwardly sized, which meant obviously it still wouldn't work because the tiles don't actually go in like that. So what I did, or what I decided to do, was keep the pivot point central and then just work out what I need to take away. And we can see that in here. It's very simple. So we just get the entire size of it. So we have to take away 7 from both of them. This was so it would never go outside of the map, because obviously if it was outside the map it wouldn't have made sense, and it really wouldn't have seemed as what's the word? It wouldn't have seemed as professional, I don't think, if there was just things sticking out of the map where there shouldn't have been. So instead I just did this very simply, and yeah, that was most of that. Obviously on here we have the on the rock. This is, I don't know if you've noticed, but some of the rocks are different sizes, and this is because I wanted to add a little bit of variation to them. So I quite simply just made 2 floats, float 1 and float 2, and then the new scale of the rock would be 1, 2, and just the normal on the Z. And this just made it feel a little bit more alive and as if it could actually be a real world, because obviously not everything is the same shape. I tried this on the trees and it just didn't quite look right, so I decided not to. And then this is just on the house, just here. So this just sets it all to the right stuff, and it also deletes all of the tiles underneath, so that it doesn't take up any of the space that those tiles would have been using. It also deletes all the trees and the rocks that it has placed itself onto, so it gives a nice clean area to the house. Now I'm going to start talking about some of the problems I had with the code, and trust me, there was quite a few. And if we see all the bits in green here, these are just some of the ones that I had run into. This is the biggest one though. This is when I was trying to clean the waters using raycasts. I've always used raycasts for most of my things. It's always worked quite nicely as well. Unfortunately, for some reason in this project, I just could not get them working, and there was constant errors, and as soon as I got one error, the code would just stop running. It would just stop in its tracks and it wouldn't run anymore. And it took me quite a few days just to get over this process of doing things, because this is how I've always done it. This is how I do it in 3D games. This is how I've done it in 2D games in the past. And for some reason here, it just did not work, and I still haven't entirely figured out why, although I do have a general gist of what it was. the general problem was that as the tiles were being created, it was still trying to check for these things. And obviously, as there was nothing there, the raycasts were getting confused. It's like, well, like, because raycasts cannot be null. They always hit something as they shoot off for infinity. There could be something at just under infinity that it will try and hit. And this was a problem for quite a few reasons. For starters, it would lag the game quite a lot. Two, it would try and do the things I wanted to do to it, because I don't know if I still have it on here. No, I don't. But I was basically saying if it is null, don't do this. And obviously that doesn't work because it can never be null. So after trying all of this and just completely failing, I just took a day away from it. I just needed to think, and I came up with this method of doing it with the names. This has quite a few downsides, however, though. If I was going to do quite a big map, it takes a lot of memory to run the check of find sorry, of game object.find. It's quite memory intensive, so I wouldn't want to do it for much bigger than 50. However, I think for what I was trying to accomplish, the 50 by 50 map works quite nicely. All I would have needed to do was add in some enemies and all of those things, and it would have gone absolutely perfect. However, though, it was after I completed this bit of code that I started to get really, really doubtful of the project. It clearly wasn't going the way I wanted it to. It didn't have sorry, it didn't have the correct amount of potential I wanted it to have. It was getting very, very hard to try and think of the next thing to do because I wanted to add so much. So I had to take a step back, just look at it and realize where I was going wrong. Unfortunately, I didn't end up using this bit of code in my main game because I went for a 2D side scroller instead, and that worked a lot better. But this is still quite a nice bit of code that I can use to show off the procedural generation potential that I have. Yeah.